today, I'd like to invite our first speaker today is Assange, Julian Assange's stepfather, who has spoken out strongly in defence of Julian Assange. Thank you, Brett.
So who the fuck is everybody? You know, these people who aren't here, they'll be complaining when they take away their freedom of speech. And they'll also be complaining when they're carted off to jail for no apparent reason. I was never a net user except for work until I saw the footage of the American Apache helicopter shooting at non-combatants, including kids. And from that I'm sure that the huge wave of support began, and it didn't just move me, but people all over the world. This was the beginning of the end of the trust in the greatest free nation in the world. In the 60s, which probably some of you weren't born by then, there was the Kent State University and the National Guard experience, and then there was Nixon's impeachment. That wasn't enough to wake them up. It took pictures and sound in real time to show the world what a cheap, crooked, nasty, jack shit redneck people are a small part of the US administration. Not all, thank God, not the majority. They're just as shocked as we are. The small-minded, bullet-headed, thick-necked, crew-cut jerk-offs that reincarnated from Nazi Germany. It's a country that can say publicly without fear of retribution that they can and will use, and I quote, extrajudicial measures, i.e. laws that at any time they can re-intervene that are not part of the current legal system or their constitution. They make it up as they go along. Extrajudicial measures are keeping Brad Manning in a cell 6 by 10, 23 out of 24 hours every day of the week indefinitely. That's torture, there's no doubt about it. Just imagine what would it be like. He's lucky he's not nuts, and if he isn't, he will be soon. They'll be asking him questions about Wikileaks. They'll be offering him things. They'll be offering him greater freedom, access to the outside world, inducements, and all he has to do is answer the questions they ask him about Julian that they seek so they can crucify him and extradite him to the US. If they're doing that to Manning, imagine what's in store for my stepson. Of course, they'll have to get him in Sweden first, and if that happens, they'll find him guilty of the absurd charges, by the way, have absolutely nothing to do with Wikileaks. They'll demand his extradition to the US on charges relating to Wikileaks. What a fucking wind-up. Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen, because if you do, the redneck pieces of shit that want him dead will have their own way, and subsequently you'll be allowing it to happen to anyone, including you. Stand up and be true to yourselves. Be your own hero. Brad Manning is a courageous man, and the only connection that gives him the possibility of charging Jules with espionage. He's never met Manning, and as with much information coming in, he has no idea where it comes from, and without connecting Manning and his information to Julian, they have absolutely no grounds for setting up for an extradition to the US, and only if the Swedish government finds Jules guilty on several counts of alleged rape. They even go to mindless playground attacks, juvenile or worse, about Jules' personal hygiene, clothing, hair, etc. Such nasty crap. School bully stuff. And although I haven't seen him for a long time, I don't really believe it. If it is true, so what? He doesn't spend more than 2 days at a time in any one place. Nasty, vicious, bully boy YOLO attacks on irrelevant, baseless issues. Can't go to jail for not showering or shaving, not yet. After this demonstration, don't go home and sit down and say, well, I've done my bit, like a lot of people who stayed at home today. You can never stop, and if you do, beware, because you could be next.
Thanks very much, Brett. Of course, this issue has outraged people all around the world. It has exposed the reality of the way that our governments work. It has shown politicians speaking openly and candidly for the first time, showing what they really think. It is a question not just about free speech, of justice for Julian Assange, but also a question about the rights of citizens to know the truth, a question about the rights of citizens to have transparency in their governments, to see what their governments are really doing in their name. Wikileaks has also exposed, in a massive way, the complicity of many major media corporations with the agenda of the United States, with the agenda of other corporations, with the agenda of occupations and war. But here in Australia, we're very lucky and proud to say that the The media union here in Australia has taken a very strong stand in support of Wikileaks and in support of Assange. And our next speaker is Alan Kennedy. He's from the Media Alliance here in Australia, and he's also a member of the Australian Press Council. I'd like to welcome Alan Kennedy.
G'day, thanks very much. As a rule, governments like secrecy, and as a rule, journalists don't. Or it's not even a rule, it's a given. Our job is to inform the community about what's going on so we can hold governments to account for what they do in our name. That's why the debate over WikiLeaks often sounds like people talking across each other rather than with each other. As a trade union, the Alliance represents journalists in Australia and New Zealand, and Julian Assange, I'm proud to say, is one of our members. He has been for several years, and that's why I'm here. But I'd be here whether he was a member or not, because this is about free speech, and it's a companion freedom of the press. And that's why right now we're right to welcome the fight for press freedom all across the Middle East, and it's spreading day by day. And it's why we notice, and I think you'll all notice, that some of the targets, the first targets of the regimes in these areas are the journalists. We've had many Australian journalists and international journalists attacked. They're the ones who get the press. But in all those countries, I know, and I've met some of them, very brave journalists who are day by day having to fight against these regimes and now find themselves targets in the battle to get freedom and democracy for their people. So it's our right, and it's your right, to see, hear and read stories that somewhere else doesn't want us to know. That's what journalism has always been about, and the rest is just advertising. I'm sure you all know Laurie Oakes, and you'll have seen him on Channel 9, or I read him in the Herald Sun, although you don't have to buy the Herald Sun. And he's been breaking important news for decades. In December last year, he won our Gold Walkley for his outstanding piece of journalism. He did this, and the thing he won it for was based on leaks about what was really going on inside the Labor Party, and he gave us two of the best stories of the year, which he received from from sources who trust him not to reveal who they are, even though he may come under pressure to do so. And apart from his own integrity, Laurie's trusted because on this at least journalists are trusted. I know you find that hard to believe. Over the past 2 decades, 25 of my colleagues have faced the risk of jail through court proceedings when they have refused to name their sources. We do not reveal a confidential source. 3 of my colleagues have ended up in jail. So you have the case of the Herald Sun journalists Harvey and McManus, who were convicted and fined for contempt of court when they refused to name the source of the story. Michael Harvey's career as a political journalist has been hampered now by the fact that he is now a convicted criminal. So he is unable to get a visa to visit the US when Kevin Rudd made a visit there as Prime Minister, all because he adhered to his code of ethics. So as experiments with freedom of information often demonstrate, governments just like keeping things to themselves. And here's the thing to think about. Recently, Australia's news organisations got together with the Alliance to form the Right to Know Federation. And in our studies, we discovered that there are 5 separate secrecy clauses on the statute books. 500 areas in which the government says, we don't have to tell you that. Some of it is to do with national security, excuse me, but it could just as be likely to be something that is embarrassing, like exports to Iraq of wheat at the wrong time. Governments like to think you can't handle the information, so they'll handle it on your behalf. But in a democracy, that information is held on trust, on behalf of the people, and it is we who have the right to be informed. The more important the information, the more important it is that we are informed. So it's abundantly clear that governments get a little irrational when leaks occur. They don't like whistleblowers, and in many cases, our whistleblowers, who should be hailed as national heroes, find themselves persecuted. Don't forget, it was a whistleblower, a nurse at Bundaberg-based hospital, Tony Hoffman, who went public with her allegations against surgeon Jayant Patel. By the way, she was persecuted for that until somebody listened to her. Here in Australia, we fought for legislation that protects the women and men who risk their jobs, sometimes their liberty, to bring us important stories. Too often, however, there's a witch hunt of whistleblowers that aims to isolate them, to denigrate them, take them to court. For their troubles, whistleblowers can end up with a criminal record. And the government has now proposed new legislation to protect whistleblowers, but its action has been slowed in the past 12 months. As a result of the Home Parliament and the intervention of independent MP Andrew Wilkie, our lobbying has given Commonwealth legislation that provides some protection for journalists, but only in the Commonwealth jurisdiction. It's crucial that all states extend that protection in all areas, including the multitude of statutory investigative bodies like the Office of Police Integrity in Melbourne or the Australian Building and Construction Commission. So it tells you there's a lot in WikiLeaks we've seen before. Journalists bringing to light information, governments trying to stop them. But the problem with governments at the moment with WikiLeaks is it's more complex than just a run-of-the-mill press freedom issue, the sort that we've confronted for the past few years. It's access to information that the internet has made possible. It's the failure to understand these changes that has led governments and even some journalists who should know better to engage in what is frankly a last century debate about whether Assange is a journalist. There are plenty of people who want to say that he can't be a journalist, so he should not be given the same protection as somebody like Laurie Oakes. It's a meaningless debate of who or who is not a journalist. Too many of these people fail to understand what journalism is or how fast it is changing. Over the past few months, we've been proud of the fact that the Australian journalism community has shown it does get it. In December, virtually every newspaper editor in the country signed a petition to our government recognising that as a media organisation, albeit a new kind of media organisation, WikiLeaks should be treated with the same respect as established traditional media. As Laurie Oakes says, whether it's a letterbox full of classified cables or $250,000 on a CD, the principle is the same. Unfortunately, within the US media community, there hasn't been the same understanding, and we have to adjust to this shift, not stand on a claim to exclusive privileges from the last century. Unfortunately, our government doesn't seem to get it either, and they initially claimed WikiLeaks was illegal, and they spent 3 months trying to climb down from that position. Now they're invoking some claim to moral force. Frankly, we don't even know what they mean by the phrase moral force. The argument seems to go like this: denying people the right to know important information about world affairs is morally valid, but revealing that information is morally wrong. I'm here today as a journalist to offer my support and that of all journalists in the Media Alliance to Julian Assange and his struggles. The idea that WikiLeaks has unthinkingly put up information for anyone to see is absurd. On the contrary, Assange has sought out and worked carefully with fellow media groups and professional journalists from around the world to ensure the information has been contextualised and any sensitive information redacted. Much of this harm minimisation strategy was suggested by WikiLeaks, as New York Times editor Bill Keller admitted recently. Keller also said, long before WikiLeaks was born, the internet transformed the landscape of journalism, creating a wide, open and global market with easier access to audiences and sources, a quicker metabolism, a new infrastructure for sharing and vetting information. Newspapers have been publishing texts of documents almost as long as they've existed, and ever since the internet eliminated space restrictions, we have done so copiously. So what it boils down to this: the criminalisation of information and those who seek to make that information public in a century where technology allows and democracy demands that information be free. In November last year, Assange got in touch with the Alliance to explain he might be in trouble paying his union dues because his credit cards have been made inoperable and his bank accounts frozen. We believe that given he was facing the most extraordinary circumstances, we would waive his union dues for a time. Recently, the Federal Secretary of the Alliance, Chris Warren, presented his lawyer, Rob Starry, with Julian's union card, and Rob has undertaken to ensure Julian receives it. The card is confirmation that Julian Assange is a journalist member in good standing with the Media Alliance. And before I go, and I know somebody else will raise this, but I don't think we should forget about the man who leaked these documents, Bradley Manning. Private Bradley Manning downloaded all this material, and I'm sure we're all wondering how the United States could be so casual with its material it now claims is so sensitive. The release of this information by Manning now has him on the road to execution. At a recent parliamentary hearing, the head of ASIO in Australia, Dennis Richardson, expressed amazement that this material was so freely available to a person very much at the bottom of the information chain. To many, Manning is the only one being called to account. Now he faces a tribunal in the United States that could condemn him to death. For more than 12 months, he's been held in appalling conditions reminiscent of the hellholes of Lubyanka or the Gestapo headquarters. He's being systematically brutalised and reduced to a hulk of a man as he sits in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. He's allowed few visitors and attempts to do daily exercises are prohibited. The man has now been given a trial date. How he can prepare that defence is unclear. We should be appalled by this inhumane treatment from the country to which we look for leadership in matters of human rights. Human rights and the right to know are more than just talking a good game. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alan. Well, as Alan said, the Australian government has been ambivalent in their response to WikiLeaks. At first, they came out and tried to allege that Julian Assange had done something illegal. But since then, they've been rather quiet, and they've also been absolutely silent on the question of the possible extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. Now, I just wanted to make a quick announcement here, because on March 16 at 6:30 right here in Sydney Town Hall, there'll be a very important meeting addressing this question, breaking Australia's silence, and we'll have John Pilger speaking, Julian Burnside QC, and also, of course, another major Australian whistleblower, Andrew Wilkie. So just encourage everyone to put that in their diary. March 16, right here, 6:30, Sydney Town Hall. Now, our next speaker is Jamie Parker from the Greens. The Greens have come out very strongly in defence of WikiLeaks and also in support of more government transparency here in New South Wales. So, our next speaker, Jamie Parker.
This is one of the great challenges of being told. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to speak out on behalf of the Greens about the WikiLeaks issue, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of WikiLeaks for freedom and democracy internationally, but also some of the progress that we've made, despite the fact there's more to be done, but the definite progress we have made by looking at a local example. I wanted to talk first of all to introduce and thank the organisers for today. It's absolutely critical that actions and events like this continue to keep pressure on the government, to keep pressure on corporations, and to make sure that the WikiLeaks effort, the effort to expose and open up information to people, is continued. So congratulations to the organisers today. It's very important to remember that what we're here for is not just about the defence of free speech, even though that is critical. It's about a whole lot more. I'm here as part of the Greens to denounce the treatment of Julian Assange, to highlight the humiliating treatment of Bradley Manning, and to expose the hypocrisy that we need to be fighting against to promote openness in government. I wanted to talk just about one brief example of the importance of WikiLeaks, which I'm sure so many of you know about. You may have seen Foreign Affairs magazine recently that highlighted the importance of the WikiLeaks cables in the uprising in Tunisia. That exposing the information that was travelling between the US ambassador to Tunisia back to Washington gave confidence, boosted the morale, and highlighted the rotten, corrupt leadership in Tunisia. So the importance of WikiLeaks is not just about an intellectual academic argument about information being knowledge. It has real, substantial, tangible benefits to open up societies and to promote democratic involvement. And what we've seen here locally is a good example of what people like you have achieved. We know that the issue of WikiLeaks has been focused internationally, and we know that the issues of WikiLeaks have helped promote change around the world. But we also know that the response here in Australia has been awful. There's been a ridiculous lack of understanding about the issues of journalism and information, and we also know that the Australian Labor government, the comments that were first made when the Julian Assange issue hit the headlines, was some of the most ignorant and ill-informed messages that we've ever seen coming from this government. But progress has been made. And in our local community, I'm the Mayor of Leichhardt Council, which is a council just 5 minutes from here, and we've had a lot of debates internally in the council about access to information. Access to information is important in local governments, in companies, in state governments, in federal parliaments. And we've made some changes locally. We've abolished fees for freedom of information requests. But last month, we put a motion to our council. And it's interesting to see the results, because the response of both Labor and Liberal is very instructive. We know 6 months ago, even in our local community, when we debated the WikiLeaks issue, the Labor and Liberal ran a mile. They didn't want to talk about it. They weren't interested. But it's due to public pressure from people like you that we managed to get part of our motion successfully adopted by Labor, Liberal and Greens councillors at Leichhardt Council. And I want to spend just a minute outlining to you what's supported and what isn't. It outlines what we have to win and what we haven't been successful at achieving so far. What was supported was that, quote, this council gives strong support to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in providing much needed openness and accountability to governments and in international relations and in foreign policy. That was adopted, and I congratulate all those parties, Labor and Liberal in particular, for supporting that. But what wasn't supported, what was argued against vehemently, this motion would never get into federal parliament, this motion would never get into state parliaments, but it got into our local government, and what did Labor and Liberal oppose? Now ask yourself this question, would you support this? That we condemn the moves by the Australian and US governments to seek to prosecute Julian Assange for his campaign of openness and accountability. We also condemn the acts taken by governments and corporations to shut down the servers used by WikiLeaks and other means to provide information to the public. And finally, we call on government and MPs to allow Julian Assange to retain his passport, to provide him full consular and other support in his fight to deal with the allegations made against him. Not supported, voted down, refused, argued against by Labor and Liberal councillors on our council. And that highlights the issue that we're here for today. We know that community uproar, that work of trade unions and community groups has forced our government to back off with their original statements, claiming that WikiLeaks activities and Julian Assange's work was illegal. But more needs to be done. We need to ensure that the claims that they make about supporting Julian Assange aren't hollow. We need to make sure our federal government stands up publicly and backs the efforts of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, that highlights the disgraceful, humiliating treatment that we're seeing Bradley Manning go through. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason why we Greens are taking this issue up in all levels of government, and why we need to make sure there's a very powerful message sent to corporations and sent to our governments that we need openness, fairness and justice, and that's what we're here to fight for. Thank you.